we're going to be looking at the best ways to schedule contact center advisors. I'm delighted to introduce two speakers to today's webinar. Someone I've known for a very long time, John Casey, who's with the consultancy CC Planning. Welcome, John.
Thanks, John. Delighted to be here, as I said earlier. Yeah.
And you're going to be looking at the whole gambit of call center planning and also and scheduling, and also how scheduling is likely to change in the future.
Yes, because I think, it's one of these things, it's always evolving, and very much what our staff want is constantly evolving, especially as our workforce brings a complete new generation into the workplace.
Excellent. I'm also delighted to welcome, I think, to his first webinar with us, Paul Chance from Nice Systems. We had a chance to catch up at the Interactions conference in London a couple of months ago. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you. Thanks. Great to be with you.
And you're going to be looking at the whole gambit of scheduling, and also the way that sort of WFM software can play into that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll talk, from the forecasting all the way through all the scheduling paradigms and how that all comes together. I have the pleasure to come over to the UK quite a bit, and actually coming back over in just a couple weeks and talking about what's new with NICE and some AI-based hiring models for the contact center. That's quite interesting.
Oh wow, that sounds like a good idea. Okay, so let's have a look at some of the housekeeping. If you want to watch the replay of today, it'll be available later on today. callcenterhelper.com/recorded webinars. If you're not already logged into our chat room, we've got a good 30 or 40 people already logged in. But here's the address here: callcenterhelper.com/chat. You just put in your first name, your last name, and your email. It does go into a separate window. So what a lot of people like to do is have the webinar slides on one side of their screen, and a separate window. They have the chat room alongside it, so you can see both things going on. We get a lot of interaction going through that, so it would be good to put that in. And there is an added advantage of being in the chat room, is that you can download the webinar slides. Certainly a lot of detail on the slides, so it'd be good for reference to download those. Here's the link: download webinar slides. And there's a particularly good slide in John's deck about forecast accuracy and how to measure that. So well worth downloading that to check you're doing it the right way. Added advantage of being in the chat room is you can ask questions or leave tips. And we have a bottle of champagne, a box of chocolates, or an Amazon gift voucher for the best tip. Here is the bottle of champagne that we've got ready to go, if you like that. Can't seem to keep chocolates in the office for some reason, but we do manage to keep the champagne here. So we'll be drawing the winning tip live at the end of the webinar. And just like to start off with some audience interaction with a poll. This is in the on the webinar slides. How far in advance do you lock down your schedules? So is it up to 3 days? Is it up to a week? Is it up to 2 weeks? Is it 3 to 4 weeks? Or is it longer than 4 weeks that you lock down your schedule? So very fascinated to see how far in advance schedules get locked down. John, in your experience, where do you think the results are likely to come?
I think it'll depend on your industry, but that 3 to 4 weeks always feels like a sweet point in terms of the balance between getting the latest forecast and giving staff enough notice to plan their life.
Well, let's have a look and see what happens there. So indeed, that is the most common sweet point. 37% do 3 to 4 weeks. Remarkably, 6% only give 3 days notice, which doesn't sound like a lot of time to sort your life out there. So could be a bit challenging. And 23% have over 4 weeks. I guess, Paul, none of those amounts are particularly good in terms of if you've got holiday time coming up or trying to plan social events.
Well, I think there's another part of this that plays into it as well. If people are doing fixed schedules, or they're doing shift bids that last, maybe their contracts with the organization is 6 months at a time, there's lots of different scheduling paradigms. And so depending on the paradigm that they use will impact, how they answer this poll as well.
Yeah, so it is a sort of one question fits all there. So if something in this doesn't quite fit in, if you'd like to put in your experience in the chat room, would be great. So thanks everyone in the audience for that. Probably a good time now to pass across to John Casey from CC Planning. And John, if you'd like to share with us some of your ideas on how to best schedule contact center advisors, would be good. If you'd just like to pop your slides up on the screen. There we go.
I will. The slides there, yes.
We are indeed, yeah.
Just let me move this camera out of the way, as I can see yourself, Jonty, and not my slides. So thanks, Jonty, and thanks for the chance to have a chat today and to get a chance to bring some ideas to the table. As you've mentioned, I do work for a company called CC Planning, one I formed about a year ago when I decided to get out there and share a lot of my knowledge with other businesses, other companies. And the whole goal of what I've tried to do in my day-to-day work is to simplify resource planning, because I do have an underlying belief that a lot of the time we're overcomplicating things when we're almost trying to dazzle with the science when we do have to bring it back to basics. And that's some of what I'll be discussing and chatting over the next 15 minutes or so. One big thing that I do, and I've just got the logo up there on screen, is for the last 7 years, I've been working closely in various roles with Ulster University over here in the UK. We designed and we brought together one of the first BSc programs for the industry. Initially for resource planners, we know you have it extended for those in quality, those in operations, with about 300 students on the books, working for a bunch of qualifications. And it really ties in with my whole goal of helping people realize their potential and get that qualification as well to help. So before we start, there's a mantra I always come back with, and something I read by Justin Robbins back when he worked for ICMI several years ago. I was talking about reporting at the time, but he always said a good report, or a good report to the business, will always show the effect or the impact on the business, on the customer, and then on the employee. So it's fine making money, but if we're working our agents to the bone, they're going to leave, and down the line we have a problem. Similarly, we might think the most efficient way is to go a little bit tight on our scheduling, and our customers wait some absolutely unrealistic times to get connected and to get that answer. And that's going to have an effect down the line where customers vote with their feet and go somewhere else. And I think that little paradox, that little example that Justin talked about at that point, actually plays very well into scheduling. And that if we're going to have what we would call the most effective schedule possible, we have to look at the business, we have to look at the customer, and we have to look at the staff member, because if we go the balance too far in any direction, something else in that triangle is going to fall. So it's all about the balance. You know, I've read a survey in the last couple of weeks, and there was a huge thing saying, as schedulers, our #1 focus is service level. And we're probably sitting listening and going, yeah, absolutely right. The good job of a scheduler is to maximize the service level. But sometimes we have to say, what is the cost? And is that extra point or two worth employee dissatisfaction, absence, attrition? And if they start to go in the wrong direction, what does that do to business results? So sometimes we have to take that step back and always ask, how do we bring everything into that balance, into that whole, keeping it all together? So Jonty had mentioned a little slide, and it's, oops, going the wrong direction. And it's always one about the measure. And I think before we do, we have to look at our capacity plans, and we have to say, how do we know where we're at? How do we measure schedule efficiency? And that same survey actually suggested that almost half, or maybe slightly more than half, of our contact centers around the globe aren't measuring schedule efficiency. So I've just given an example for a few hours, and you can see the first column of data says how many staff we needed, the second column how many we had, and then in that next column, the difference, you can see that all the negatives and all the positives add up to 0. So we got our staffing right for the day, we got the right staff into the building. But when we look at the final column, where we only use absolute differences and that we only ever have negative or positive numbers, we always remove the negatives, you can see that there was a 5% difference across that day. So one thing, and I think it's the first tip I would recommend to anyone, is that we always have to have a tracker on our schedules. We always have to have a tracker on what we're delivering against what we actually needed to see how good it is. And we could see by moving a few people about there, we could bring that 5% down quite easily. A few months back, I was actually speaking on another one of these webinars looking at the whole planning process. And I thought it was worth just bringing one slide back, which is the planning cycle, something we're all well aware of. A cycle and a concept, it actually goes back a couple of 100 years to a guy called Deming, who was looking at the whole planning cycle in life, not necessarily in contact centres, which obviously didn't exist at the time. But he was very much about plan, act, review, and do, and making how we bring the stuff together. And I think in our contact centre, we have to remember where scheduling sits, and it sits bang in the middle of our planning cycle. And I guess we're just so reliant on what we get from the forecasting, but we also have to be conscious that if we give out a substandard, those guys monitoring and watching the real-time team are affected by what we do. So it's always well worth saying our schedule's only as good as what we're given, but also if we don't do it to the best of our abilities, are we causing problems for colleagues down the line? So a key question that's always worth asking is sometimes, why does resource planning, and in particular the scheduling part, fall over? And I think that can be brought back to life with one very simple thing, and it's the randomness of human behavior. I mean, when I talk about forecasting, I always ask, why would somebody want to contact your business, and why would they want to do it today? And actually, why would they want to be doing it in this interval? But similarly, we have to go back and say, what goes on in our staff, our advisors, our agents' life for them to cause random effects as well, and how do we balance that? So with shift patterns, we obviously take that a step further, and we have the old classic that depending on your opening hours, full time is no longer valid. This was just an example I knocked up where green is our demand across the day, and we've got the classic camel's hump or M shape, which quite a lot of our businesses will see. And when we put 2 full-time shifts against that, we see the red line, which gives us the age-old problem of too many staff in the middle of the day. Great to make sure everybody gets a good lunch break. Great to allow us to do a little bit of training, coaching, one-to-ones, whatever reviews. But even those activities never meet the demand. They never bring down that white gap sitting there in the middle, in between the two. So we always have a surplus, which obviously means at other times in the day, we're short-staffed. Probably not news to anyone on the call, but always worth reminding us. And it's when we get some of that randomness and we bring some of the spikes in, then is what happens towards the end of the day if we get a volume influx. What happens in the middle of the day if we're even quieter than expected. And I think even as schedulers and even chatting to our forecasters, we have to come back to that randomness, that random events. What are our customers doing and what are our staff doing with adherence, lateness, absence, all the things we talked about in that little bit of preamble before we went live for those who were with us, some of the headaches we have of staff, and I think we could sum it up as actually just not doing what we expected them to do. But part of that actually comes back to something where we often try to shoehorn our staff into a one-size-fits-all. I don't have it in the slides, but I've seen a great slide today on a website which talked about the difference between equality and equity. And it's got the 3 guys, 3 children of different heights looking over a fence, and they all get a box to stand on, which is the same height, but that only allows one of them, the 2 smaller children, still can't see over. But when we give them boxes of different heights, the 3 of them can see over, and they all feel that they're getting the same experience. I think we do a lot of that for those of us who do rotations, for those of us who do fixed shifts, where we try to balance weekends, or we balance the nights, the days, and we come up with something. That type of equality that we're bringing in isn't always equal in the eyes of the staff member, because their balance of their perception of the perfect shift, their perception of what is fair, their perception of what they need in life and what's going to help them stick to the business is different from the person beside them. So one thing we have to get away with scheduling is stopping this. Everyone works a 40-hour, 35-hour, 37-hour, depending where you are in the week, where they do 5 shifts of equal lengths, and they do mornings this week, nights next week, or whatever that might be. That's not where we're going. And what we're seeing in Europe, particularly in countries like Sweden and other Nordic companies, is actually moving to 4-day weeks with longer shifts. They're looking at where work-life balance can be done with very different things, and I think that's all positive. But I think the one thing we can remember is flexibility works in 2 ways. And as a business, we need to be flexible with how we deal with those requests, the problems, the headaches we heard earlier, as opposed to the rigidity which we sometimes put in. And I'm going to come back to that in a moment. So there's a famous quote out there, Donald Rumsfeld, who many years ago, around the time of the Iraq War, was the US Secretary of State. And he made a speech where he talked about there were known unknowns, unknown knowns, known unknowns, unknown unknowns. And he was talking about what, as military commanders, they could predict. What they didn't know it was happening, but they had a handle on it of the unexpected happening, and what was just totally random. I just want to build this up over a couple of quick slides to show how I think it's very, very relevant, even as schedulers, and how we do in our business. And it's asking ourselves in the question, why do our customers call? Not because they need technical support, because they need a balance on their bank statement, because they have a problem with their order. But think of the more unique things and ask yourself the question, how far in advance do we know about it, and how big is the impact? And that how far in advance ties nicely to that first poll. Because if we know the majority of our things 2 weeks in advance, is releasing the schedules 3 weeks out the best thing, because we suddenly find we need to make changes, or it doesn't meet demand and causes problems. But if we're stable and we know things 2 months out, 90% or 95% of the time, then we can release our schedules even earlier. So just think about your center and start to drop into that matrix various things that go on. I mean, many of you will be waiting on the shiny new iPhones tomorrow. Something that's actually quite predictable, and something which now is not. That would have been definitely a lot higher in the matrix 3-4 years ago, when everybody changed their phones every year. Now cost comes in and we just don't afford, or we don't feel we get the benefits. But we also have things like IT outages and terrorism, where we get little to no knowledge of it, but the impact is huge. And the reality, as I mentioned before the call, when we were just talking about incidents and outages, when you have a severe weather that nobody predicted, that never happened in your part of the world, maybe for a generation, there's nothing you can do. And sometimes you put your hands up and say, that's that. But there's other things we know about, and there's stuff that marketing do, things that goes on that's predictable, and it should take our scheduling strategy. And I think you can split it into 2 concepts. Everything on the left is about volatility, and no amount of scheduling can normally deal with volatility. That advance notice is far too short, and we're into almost overtime, reserve options, stuff like that, where we just panic react on the day. But when it comes to seasonality, we should be able to build that into actually our hiring plans and our scheduling plans. So to kick off with seasonality, things like annualized hours, some planned overtime, where we almost say once or twice a year there'll be overtime available in and around Easter, because our core product is selling Easter eggs, so we know it, and we're always happy to give a bit of overtime to help you plan for your summer holidays or whatever it might be. But also things like term time workers, maybe mothers or fathers with young children who want to work shifts when his children are at school, or the reverse, people at university who want to work during the holidays, and because your training can accommodate that, or we can take a segment of calls, we can use that over a seasonality time just to give us that ability to flex up and flex down. You know, students might work 40, 45 hours over the summer and do 10 hours across the term time, something like annualized, but something just that little bit different. But with volatility, it's very much about that two-way streak. Did we accommodate somebody's request last week? So that, sorry, Siri's just decided to speak back to me, apologies. So that when we need something a little bit more fluid, a little bit back from the agents, they're more likely to give it to us because we help them with a time off request, or a, can I finish an hour early for an emergency doctor's appointment for my child, or whatever that might be. But also the ability maybe to adjust the shift lengths and almost say there will be so many times a year where we'll move you from an 8-hour to a 10-hour, very short notice, but we guarantee within a month we'll give you that time back as some extra time off. But also opens the concept of the Uber workforce. And one of the beauties of how Uber set up their operating model is somebody who goes to work for them designs and chooses their schedule. They obviously commit to doing a bare minimum, and I think there's something coming in on that with schedules, almost where people will say, I guarantee I will always work 25 hours a week, but there's weeks I'll let you know I'll do more, there's other weeks I want to work the minimum. In fact, even on the day I might request, can I come in and do an extra shift because I'm available, whatever I was planning to do isn't happening, and if you're short, I'm willing to do it. And I think the technology that's coming, and Paul's going to speak a little bit about the technology and the fact that staff can and should, irrespective of system, be able to access the scheduling software, the annual leave software from anywhere, will help with that Uber concept as we move forward. We have to just remember work-life balance. Somebody's perfect shift, as I said earlier, doesn't always mean the next person will think that's perfect, so keep that in mind. And just building on the Uber and what I said was, why not think of things like allowing every advisor, if you could have one thing in your schedule every week, what would it be? So perhaps there's a TV show they watch the same night every week. Perhaps they go to their children's sports event the same day every week. Maybe they actually have elderly parents and need to take them to an activity or a medical appointment same time every week. The reason's irrelevant. But often to get that buy-in and keep people longer, we have the technology which allows us to put into our WFM and into our rules that ability to say, doesn't matter what, but Wednesday after 6, John never works. And am I more willing to give that bit of extra flexibility and that bit of extra help to meet that volatility? Probably, because I don't always feel that I'm second guessing my life around the shift patterns. Similarly, for those who do rotational patterns, it's always the same too, not always one size fits all. So I think we have to jump back and say, if we're big enough, if our centre's probably more than 60, 70 seats and we have a rotating pattern where you work through it a certain number of weeks, and the example here just shows you can actually have two very different rosters, different days off. One has more of a balance of 2 days off consecutive, one is more of a balance of single days, but give exactly the same coverage. So again, speak to our staff and almost say, well, if you got a choice between the left and the right, which would you prefer? Which works better for you? And let's try and accommodate them into 2, 3, or 4 buckets, because that will allow staff to feel more motivated and more aligned to the business. Last minute time off requests, I think we've definitely come back, and just as I finish off a few slides, we do have to think about the flexibility staff want, and I'm going to have a slide in a moment about Generation Z and what that means for the business. But sometimes it's getting away from a famous phrase here in the UK from a TV show, computer says no, to actually stepping back and let's talk to people. Why are you asking for that day off tomorrow? Are you able to share your reason, and what is it you actually need? Because I've seen it back in operations last year. Often when you sat down with somebody, you'd actually get, well, is it the day off? Or could you come in at 11 once they, and if it's 11:30 because you get delayed at that appointment, don't panic. sometimes that just gives us, because it's better to have somebody for 6 hours than 8 hours, especially if it's that important that they have to be off. They'll still want their annual leave day as well as that unauthorised absence. And one tip on that I always say is, let's manage annual leave in hours, not in days. Because if we work out with the annual allocation, and staff tend to take 1 and 2 hours off for an appointment instead of having to take a day, their loyalty to the business, their thoughts that the business actually wants them and will work with them is immense, and will actually help with unauthorised absence and with attrition. Home working is a big one, and about 10% of businesses now do home working to some extent, but I think in the future we're going to see that an awful lot more. That actually it allows us to retain staff, but more importantly, it brings in that famous split shifts, because nobody wants to work from 9 to 1 and from 5 to 9. But actually, for some people, they're willing to work for a period when the kids are at school or whatever it is goes on in their life, and then stop. And then maybe later in the evening, they're happy once the kids are in bed to do another couple of hours online. And that might meet your demand profile. But nobody's going to come to the office twice in one day, especially if they live more than a 10-minute commute, because it's just not worth their time. I was actually in one business last week who actually had a system where staff came in and they worked up to their lunchtime. And then they could take a slightly longer lunch and they could work from home later in the day or in the evenings when the staff was minimum. And for the staff, it gave them the benefit of the social interaction of being at work, but also not having to worry about transport home later in the day. And again, I think technology is putting that where we go. So just to finish, 2 more minutes, gig economy Generation Z is the buzzwords out there. And there's a workforce coming in now who actually are more digital savvy, who actually, for whatever reason, and probably because they're getting married later, they're actually living with mom and dad for a lot longer than traditionally others would have. They don't necessarily leave the home till their mid-20s or even later. But actually, they have a whole psyche and a whole culture of wanting freedom, but wanting fulfillment and excitement, both in work and life, that they're actually looking for something else. They're happy to have multiple jobs, so they have different experiences. They're actually also happy to get away from that 40-hour week. And the top right phrase is actually something important, whereas in the past, a lot of us worked so we had the money in which to live. They actually see living is more important, and work just helps them get there in terms of giving some of that financial information. And actually, to deal with them, we have to take perhaps a different approach. And there's a lot of bad publicity in the UK about 0-hour contracts, but maybe if it changes into a minimum commitment from both party contracts, 20, 25, 30 hours, and we allow staff to use technology, to use AI, and to use systems that's coming in to define their own shifts. Obviously, they can't work 9 to 1, 5 days a week. They have to take some of the pain, and I'll let Paul talk a bit more about that. But also, there can be a rule which says 6, 7, 8 times a year you will work 40 or 45 hours because of the customer demand. But allowing people to actually change their availability, constantly see if it's possible to opt out or opt into lesser additional shifts as they work, allowing to work different lengths day and week. It's going to create a loyalty, because this workforce is loyal as long as their needs are met. And this all comes down to the technology in the future and our willingness, and probably our need as schedulers, to be problem solvers and to look out and see what else can we do, and not just go for the 5 days a week, 9 hours per day type scheduling. So I think I've just overran by a couple of minutes, so apologies, Jonty, but that finishes the slides I prepared.
Thank you very much indeed for that, John. I think some very good points there. Certainly, if you're doing measurement, do it at interval level and check the accuracy against each as an absolute value. I think the technique is called mean absolute percentage accuracy, or MAPE. Don't assume that everyone wants the same shifts. I think there's a big danger of the one size fits all. So some people might like 4-day weeks, some people like weekend only shifts. We've got the whole gig economy. So I think, ask, don't assume. but flexibility is a two-way street. I think that's quite an interesting one. I've seen certainly contact centers say you can pick your own shift during the week, and we'll put that in, providing that you work one Friday and one Saturday evening per month as a sort of kind of, you can pick it during the day, but we just, those are just difficult shifts to cover the Saturday and Friday evenings. And then also plan for seasonality and also for volatility. Because it's great to have the forecast accuracy until it all starts to go wrong. And really, a forecast is also about how do you deal with those unexpected events. Well, let's have a look in the chat room. Some of the questions that have been coming through. So the couple of comments on the poll. Ian said our biggest headache is agents not checking schedules, so missing scheduled events. That's a tricky one. Michelle said we don't change schedules. Advisors know their schedules when they're hired. So I guess there's a danger there that the world can change since when people are hired. Ian said we schedule 6 weeks in advance. We found get any further out than that, and the forecasts start to get less accurate. So unless you've got a sort of two teams, can be difficult. And Josh says we schedule about 6 weeks in advance, but can make changes without notice up to 2 weeks. Before. So let's have a look at the first tip. Laura says, when able to, let your agents pick from some set schedules. We've just implemented this last year and it's vastly improved agent satisfaction. I think, John, that was what you were saying about giving a lot more choice.
Yeah, I mean, I remember doing an exercise with a client several years ago where we designed different types of schedules, almost the example I had with the A and the B, except we had many of them. And we actually went out and said, in your perfect world, choose A, B, C, D, E, F, or G. And their schedule efficiency actually went up with the staff choosing their own. People don't always assume they want to go 9 to 5 when you put the limits in. They're clever, and if they're on bonuses, they know the best times, which is usually the busiest times.
Indeed. Well, there's a question, Paul, I don't know if you can help with this one. Rick has said, for those of you who schedule four-day, 10-hour shifts, so working 4 long days rather than 5 shorter days, do you find your agents lose productivity later in the day due to the longer shifts? Currently, my agents work 5 days, 8-hour shifts. I've considered allowing 4-day work weeks, but my concern is that the agents will be tired and not as productive during the long days. I don't know if you've seen any statistics about whether 4 or 5 days.
Yeah, we have seen similar types of things, and I've actually seen some people try 3 12s and a 4, and it's even exaggerated in that situation. Where we have seen it work, it depends somewhat on the industry and what kind of calls they're taking, but if they can change their break rules a little bit to give a little bit more time in the afternoon when they're maybe fatigued, maybe let them go play ping pong in the game room or whatever, or shuffleboard. The call centers are getting quite clever on how they allow people to relax a little bit. But if you're just working them straight, you definitely see fatigue start setting in, after the 8-hour normal time frame.
Yeah, so regular breaks, I think is a great idea. I can imagine it being very popular with people because you get effectively a 3-day weekend, which could work well if you can keep. And maybe it's trialing. Maybe some people are more suited. Just look at the quality scores, and you don't automatically get to keep it. Ian said we measure schedule fit, but try not to get too close to zero. We leave some fat in to allow for unexpected issues, staff sickness, emergency leave, short notice meetings, or training requirements, in addition to built-in shrinkage. So, John, that looks like a good way of dealing with some of the volatility.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I seen a graph last week from one of the students in the course where they measure the staff for the day and then they measure the curve. And probably in a perfect situation, if the business gives you the budget, which is always the caveat, having a curve, which is just 1% or 2 greater than you need, just gives you that volatility if unexpected volume comes in.
Yeah, I'd love to see that graph, and certainly one I've not seen before. So if that is possible to be shared with me, that would be great.
I'm opening it, so let's see what's possible.
Michelle has said forecasting tends to fail over when the forecasting is done by upper management who are using an Erlang C methods to determine how many agents are needed to handle the volume without considering agent behaviours such as schedule adherence and the like. Paul, I know you're not a massive fan of people using Erlang calculators on their own to schedule.
Well, yeah, there's a problem, right, with Erlang. Erlang doesn't do really well. It was never designed back in 1900 whatever when Erlang created it. It wasn't created to handle skills very well. And so when there's multiple skills, it doesn't consider that. So most WFM solutions tend to overstaff to make up for the skill efficiencies not being quite accurate. The other thing that happens, it doesn't take blockage, it doesn't take abandons. Erlang has some known limitations. There's a need, and most WFM actually use some derivative of Erlang as their base. It's a weighted moving average, and there's a need to use a lot of other algorithms to really be able to forecast accurately and be able to take in all your shrinkage considerations, et cetera, into the formula.
Excellent. Well, we've had a tip in from Steph who says engagement is key. We're currently implementing shift preferences and have engaged much more with the workforce on this, meaning agents have a say in what shifts they would like to do, but we're still being able to cover opening hours and demand, which I think is an excellent idea. We've had a question in from Michelle who says, how do you handle small call centers with limited hours? For instance, 8 a.m. till 7 p.m. We have 2 shifts, 8 to 5 and 10 to 7 with 23 agents. John, you mentioned staggered opening times.
Well, I mean, 8 to 7 at 11 hour opening hour is the absolute classic time for the 2 shifts and that big middle of the day overlap. The question always, I think, in this is, do you need full-time staff? Have you got an option to bring a number of people on shorter hours, or to allow a little bit more flex where people can take just some time paid off if it's in the middle of the day? Perhaps even things, and I've seen it, I think it was MBNA many years ago, they used to say, on any day, if you want a longer lunch break to go into town, to go do whatever you need to do in life, you can have it without asking. Well, you have to ask, but you can come in and say, can I take a 2-3 hour lunch break today? And that helps you meet the 2 ends of the day and get that extra staff and bring the overstaffing down. So it's just questioning, is the traditional 40 hours the right staffing approach?
And it could well be that not everyone wants to work all of the hours. So some people might be happier to finish, do a shorter day, say working, 10 till 4, which again more fits the profile as well. And Ian's also answered this. He said, we have staggered shift starts for each day. So we introduce the ability to agents to request preferred start times for specific days. We take this into account when scheduling. It's improved engagement for the majority of agents. So I think some great parts there. Okay, we're going to jump through to another poll just before we hand across to Paul. And the question is, do you allow self-service shift swaps? This is, and the options for this are, yes, we do it through some automated technology that allows self-service shift swaps. Yes, but we have a manual process, so perhaps where you allow some degree of self-service, people sorting out shift swaps between themselves, it goes to an agent, to a supervisor who then has to put it into the schedule, or do you not allow that? So let's just have a look at the results there. The results here, only about 33% of the audience are doing it through software. Is that a surprise for you, Paul?
No, not at all. And there's lots of reasons for that, but most people want to have the shift swap capability because the agents really like it, but they do require then for it to go through a manual approval process in most cases. The technology is there. It exists to allow people to completely automate it and make it based upon service levels being met. Maybe if your service levels are being met, make them automatically be approved, or in that interval, maybe you might be on the border. So in that situation, you might need an approval. So the technology exists to really automate a lot of that, but most people have not adopted that yet.
Indeed. Well, it's probably a good time to hand across to Paul, and then because I think you're going to be touching on some of the technology in your presentation. So, Paul, if you'd like to put the slides up on the screen and take us through your thoughts.
Great. Can you see my screen?
We can indeed, yes.
Outstanding. So, yeah, I think it's very interesting. John and I did not collaborate a whole lot on exactly what we were going to talk about, but there's an awful lot of synergy between what John was talking about and what I'm going to be talking about from a technology standpoint. When we get into the conversation about how to engage the workforce, it's important to understand this culture shift that John mentioned. And the Deloitte study, this is a study that came out this year, actually, from Deloitte on the Global Millennial Survey, where employees are dissatisfied with that work-life balance. This work-life balance is really becoming the main motivation. And therefore, people are considering to leave their current employer just because of the lack of work-life balance. And this is in addition to the traditional high churn rates that we have within the contact center market. As we all know, the contact center market maybe is a higher attrition rate than maybe some others. And this study from Deloitte was not just for contact centers. So we could see our attrition rates even go higher with the Gen Z and the millennials because of this work-life balance. And when we look at this gig economy and how this impacts us, this employment is really based around highly flexible and freelance contract-based work that's offered by Uber or Postmates or other marketplaces like Fiverr, where the millennials and the Gen Zs get to pick what hours they work. This allows the opportunity for them to increase their income and work the hours that they want and get that work-life balance. Well, with all this desire for work-life balance, it's interesting to note that when we survey the industry, and I did a survey, this statistics comes from ICMI, where less than 1/3 of contact centers are very satisfied with their existing scheduling processes. And, there are a million different ways that people schedule, but the result is less than 33% are really happy with the way it's working. Well, why is that? And I think there's a couple reasons. There are two fears when trying to adopt a more preference or available model. One is the business is afraid that they will not be able to cover their business needs if they open this door for preferencing and availability to be considered. The other is a fear that their agents will not be treated fairly, and therefore they'll go to HR and say, there's a problem. Agent Mary Smith just got her preferences. How come I didn't get mine? And nobody wants to go there. So there's a fear. And so I'm actually surprised that more companies have not adopted the preferencing capabilities that are existing in software today. But let's talk about some solutions rather than just the problems that exist. When we look at the workforce management process, it begins with this idea of making sure that you know the requirements. And earlier I mentioned that most contact center solutions for workforce management are based on a weighted moving average, where you take the last 13 weeks and you weight the last week's higher because it's more current, so you give it more weight, and then you use that to predict the future. Well, that works in some situations when it's a very flat, very predictable type of demand curve. What happens when there is a lot of seasonality? There are other algorithms, other time series and algorithms such as Box-Jenkins, ARIMA, or multi-seasonal linear regression and triple exponential smoothing, and all these different algorithms that exist out there that are actually much better at finding the hidden patterns in the data to be able to predict that requirement in a better way at the skill level and at the interval level all the way through it. So we begin with the right and actually using some artificial intelligence to help identify that, so you don't have to run 48 different scenarios and figure out which has the best MAPI score for accuracy. The system will automatically do that for you. And so you get the best requirement to start with. The next part is the generation of the schedule. Now, this is where it gets interesting. I noticed in the comments that we received that a lot of people are trying to offer options to your agents on what schedules they want to work. What if we gave them the ultimate flexibility? So the business sits down and they look at their week and they look at the intervals in that week and they assign point values. And maybe the hard to fill shifts that have the highest demand, they give a higher point value. Then they tell the agents that you need to hit a certain number of points, and the agents then pick and paint their schedule based on the availability. So that puts the onus then on the agent to be able to say, I know I'm going to have to work at least one weekend a month, or one weekend night a week, or whatever your business rules happen to be. But you're letting the agent make those decisions. You're not forcing them to from the business point of view. So you can set these rules up and allow the guarantee that this availability will be met. This is quite different than the way preferences work. So this guaranteed availability acts as a constraint to the schedule generation. So when the schedule is generated, it combines all the business rules. It looks at the availability at the agent level. It looks at the time off and the vacation planning and all those different details and the requirements, and they all could come together and generates their schedule. Well, the next is now you need to allocate your resources to those schedules. And that's where this idea of preferences come in. These are things like days off, days per week. How do you want to measure fairness? Do you want to measure that from some sort of KPI from a performance management system? Do you want to base it on seniority? Do you want to look at hours per week, lunch length of time? When do they start their lunches? How many hours into their system? When start times and stop times? All those different type of priorities. You can even create custom priorities. There's actually millions and millions of combinations of how these preferences can be set up according to your business rules as well. So once that schedule is created and you've guaranteed their availability, now you take it the next level and say, what would you like to consider for the schedule? So preferences become a consideration. They're not a guarantee, but they're based that you're going to get it depending on how your fairness rules are set up. The fourth part is once you publish that schedule, many contact centers require the agent to come into work and look behind the firewall and look at the system or look at the board and see when they're supposed to be coming in. We think it's a better way to be able to actually show that through their mobile devices and actually allow them to interact with it through their mobile devices for time off. I need to be sick today, so they can just click on the sick exception and away you go. The last part is this idea of schedule changes. Now, when we deal with intraday, obviously you're dealing with automatic reforecasting and resimulation to make sure that you've got the right number of requirements, and that takes place seamlessly, where as soon as you finish an interval, it starts reforecasting for the next one. So you always know what is the best requirement and where you're staffed at and what you need to do. So we take it a next step further, and we allow the system to monitor all those different skill groups and say, what if we're understaffed? We need to ask people if they're wanting to work additional hours. So we can automatically trigger that rule and reach out on their mobile devices, on their preference communication style, and say, hey, would you like to work a few extra hours? And if they do, great. They accept it. It modifies the schedule. That schedule goes back to WFM and updates the WFM solution, and everything works great. If maybe you're overstaffed and you want to give people the option to take a few hours off, maybe they want to be able to go to a concert or something. Great. Send them a message. Hey, we have some voluntary time off opportunities. Would you like it? Again, you're putting the onus back on the agent to make the decision rather than the business coming in and saying, you need to take off, you need to go home early, or we need you to stay late, and putting the agent in that awkward situation where they feel like they have to do it or they're in jeopardy. So this is what it looks like from the mobile, where you can see the schedules. You can see on the second one the color coding, and that's looking at the service levels and business rules to say, hey, there is availability, and if it's green, it'll automatically be approved. And if it's blue, maybe you can request it, but it's going to need to go to a supervisor because the service level is right on the border, and we're not sure whether we really want to be able to give automatic approvals for that. So it would go, or you could request swaps with other agents with the right skill sets, etc. You can see in the third one where you can request your absences and easily update then WFM. You can set your preferences on how you want to be contacted, either by SMS, email, etc., or when do you want to be contacted. Don't call me at the middle of the night that there's an opportunity for 8 o'clock in the morning. Or you have something scheduled every Sunday between 10 o'clock and 12 o'clock in the morning, so don't bother calling me at those times. I don't want to be disturbed. You can call me after that about opportunities for extra hours or voluntary time off type things, but you set all those preferences at the agent level. So really what we're talking about is two different ways that this takes place. One is through automated staffing rules that go through and are constantly monitoring everything and determines what needs to take place. It also does alerting and reminds people, hey, you're 10 minutes late from lunch, you probably should go back. Or you allow ultimate self-service capabilities where the agent can look at their schedule on their phone. Maybe they just got a phone call from their friend that says, hey, the concert is tonight. I got extra tickets. Would you like to go? And they say, wait a minute, I'm scheduled to work. Let me see if I can get off. They can look easily on their phone and see right away whether that'll be approved without ever having to call a supervisor. And they can make the change right then, get back to their buddy and say, yeah, no problem. I've already taken care of work. Let's go on to the concert. All those things work fantastically to help the level of customer engagement. And so as a result, the Gartner has rated us the top vendor in the market for the last 3 years in a row on our ability to execute engagement and our completeness of our vision for workforce engagement. And obviously you can look at the full report, and there's also a capabilities report you can look at, et cetera. But with that, what I'd like to do is turn back over to you, Jonty, and see if we have any questions.
Jonty, you're currently on mute at the moment.
Up on the screen here. Some good points there, Paul, in the presentation. Make your schedules fair.
Wrong screen.
We're seeing the wrong screen. Okay, so yeah, some good points in the presentation there, Paul. Make your schedules fair. Make your schedules visible and changeable, particularly through mobile phones, I think is a great way of communicating with people. And set up an automated approval system where you don't need to, for a lot of things, you don't need to go to a supervisor to get approval. I think that's a very sensible when we know that. And certainly I've seen that in case with a point where things like overtime, where you know in the morning whether things are going to be busy. And I've seen contact centers where the supervisor's gone around at 4 o'clock saying, John, can you work some overtime this evening? I think you mentioned that, Paul. Whereas, and the response is, well, if you'd asked me at 10 o'clock, I could have arranged some cover. But actually, now you're asking me at 4. It's a bit late, and I'm going to have to leave. So, just I think making it all as automated as we can. So, what I'd like to do is just another quick poll. Would you like to see a demonstration of Paul's workforce management system? If you just want to see that, if you'd like to vote on that in the poll, certainly some of that automated approval, I think was quite a nice thing to have a look at. So I'll just close that off now, and let's have a look at some of the top tips and questions from the audience. Beth Ann has said shift switching is very helpful. Someone who works an 8 a.m. shift switches with a 10 a.m. start time person, say if they have a dentist appointment in the morning. A good way of getting to the dentist. Anna said we have a mix of full-time, part-time and relief staff. Full-time and part-time shifts are fixed, and relief staff fill in around those. We have a wide variety of shifts we use. John, I guess that fits in very well with the sort of staffing profile that you have.
It does, especially if you're tending towards the volatility as opposed to the seasonality. Having that bit of a workforce who maybe need less notice or are willing to take a wider variety of shifts, perhaps as a reward for them for doing that. But it really does work as a very tactical solution.
Indeed. We've got a couple of questions coming about huddles. Chris has said, has anyone have any ideas of how to schedule in daily huddles for each team when resources tight within the call center? Michelle's also said, and how do you keep your huddles from going over time? Paul, have you seen huddles working for scheduling?
You can plan have your meeting planner part of the WFM solutions, help with that. The challenge is, as Michelle mentioned, going over in time is a challenge, and it takes discipline from the leaders, the team leaders that are leading those huddles. It depends on the business. Some businesses absolutely require those huddles for whatever's going on, and some are a little bit more flexible.
Indeed. Dan said, I recently developed our entire rota after asking the department how they wanted their shifts to look. Asked 7 questions, which were key to the rota layout, then built it to their requests. One of the options was around days off, paired up or split, paired up 1. So that's what they got. I guess paired up days off is quite a good one. John, I see problems where people say, if I'm going to work a weekend, please get the Saturday and the Sunday together, rather than making me work a Saturday one weekend and a Sunday the following weekend.
Some people like to work full weekends, others prefer to get the whole thing off. But we also have to think about the country we're in, because I know from France, for example, if you have Sunday as a day off, by law, you must have Saturday or Monday, which causes a lot of problems because traditionally Monday's the busy day. So I think a lot of people prefer it. Business demand just doesn't always allow us to do it carte blanche across the entire team every week.
Indeed. So a comment here for Paul. Ian has said, we're currently working towards upgrading our WFM system to link with a mobile app. So looking to forward seeing how this works, particularly from an engagement perspective. So I guess, Ian, you've signed up for the demo. There's also a chance to do that in the exit poll if you want. And Jonathan said, homework is really good. It can boost productivity by up to 46% and reduce absenteeism by 44%. Paul, are you seeing similar uplifts with homework? I know it's more prevalent in the United States than in Europe.
Yeah, and again, I think it depends. We're seeing the outsourcers embrace work at home projects quite a bit. There's a cultural aspect here that kind of goes outside the WFM world that needs to be looked at, whether the culture really embraces home working or not, and whether their IT supports it from being able to have the infrastructure to access all the applications and the telecom right. But yeah, it definitely, people like it working at home.
Well, I'm afraid we're coming to the top of the hour now. It's been a lot of fun, this webinar. So if you'd just like to put into the chat room, what is it that you've liked best about today's webinar? Let's have a look at today's winning tip. And today's winning tip comes from Claire. Claire says, when our new shift suites we've built, we looked at the business, the customer and the employee, which I think is a method that John had proposed. This improved morale in the operation and the demand is being handled better. We have full-time shift patterns with the 10-hour, 4 days a week shift pattern, which is working well. My operations are blended, so our paperwork time is now smooth over the week as well. So I think a great tip there. If you'd like to complete the survey when you leave the webinar, would be great. And just a reminder, if you want to see a replay, that will be available in about an hour's time, callcenterhelp.com/recorded webinars if you want to share this with your senior management team or the rest of your planning team. We're back next week looking at 5 tips to improve call center performance. And just like to thank our two speakers, John Casey, thank you for joining us today.
No problem, John. It's been fun.
And Paul Chance, been great to have you online, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.
And thank you to everyone in the audience. We'll see you all again next week. Thanks then. Bye-bye, everyone. Bye-bye.